Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. This is part 2 from the Obama interview on Forbes. Before we get into it, I'd like to briefly remind you that all presidents and all politicians are Luciferians. They play the game. They all have their own personal opinions about things, but they've committed to Luciferianism. Okay, so she asks him, how do you think we can rebuild a sense of shared national identity? And she also says, let me give you the other one, because maybe they overlap. We have a number of different sectors in this country who are now sort of banding together in the face of hostility. And what are their different roles in that project? And I'm thinking of universities and law firms and businesses, and you talked about media and also about culture. Okay. So her question suggests that she believes that the answer is for people to have a shared national identity. Now keep in mind there's a difference between a fascist nation and a communist nation and the various types of socialist nations, okay, who often are like straw men for the idea of socialism. For example, there's social democrats. It simply means that they want a higher tax rate for the rich, and most Americans want that. Most Americans are socialists to a certain degree. They're not socialists in terms of redistributing all the wealth and having the public control everything together, but they're socialists in terms of social programs, right? Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, welfare, the various welfare programs, SNAPs, what have you. So Obama says, so there is this great American story, and it's like the great American songbook. There is a running thread through America from Thomas Paine and George Washington to the Emerson and Lincoln and Douglas, and all the way through King and Kennedy's inaugural address. There's the Whitman there. There's a story about America that everybody, that includes everybody, rather. It's a good story. It's a story about people who aren't pretentious and don't believe that anybody is worse than them or better than them, and that we're all endowed with a core dignity and are deserving of rights and respect and have to assume responsibility for ourselves individually and our collective lives. This part is key here. Let's read this again here. A core dignity and are deserving of rights and respect and have to assume responsibility for ourselves individually and our collective lives. So people aren't assuming responsibility. For example, the protesters, right? When they're protesting immigration, there's everything from gang members to unions and communist groups and anarchists and all kinds of different groups. And they all come together for a protest that's not going to bear any fruit, right? They're moving too slow. They're not effective. People are being deported. Are they doing what they need to do to the best of their ability? No, not as a group. And as individuals, are they trying to get people to rally and come together and have peaceful debates and publicize them? Are they trying to push for my war on poverty plan or a global farming plan, my global farming plan or something similar to it? No. So they're not doing what they need to do to the best of their ability. So are they really respecting each other? Are they really respecting society? First and foremost, are they respecting God and the righteous? No. Are Republicans with their stance? No. No one's kind of giving people the respect. No one's kind of giving people respect to the degree that they deserve and that whatever degree they've earned, except for me, okay? Because they're not doing the right thing, right? Greater love has none than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends, okay? And one's true friends are those who try to get them to obey God, what have you. And also, as I'm being fumed, right? Society collectively is either aggressively fuming me or they're slacking their work. So they're not giving me a sort of core dignity. They're not giving me my rights and the respect I deserve. And they're not taking responsibility. And they do so again and again every day. And we see in Hosea, we see in other books in the Bible where God says that their marriages are invalid. We see it in Malachi. And we'll be going over that in the future videos soon if I'm still, if my flesh is still alive. Okay. He goes on to say, and we all play a part in that historically has not been a Republican or a Democratic idea. That is an American idea that everybody could tap into. If that ends up being our starting point for a common identity, if our starting point is these hopes and values. We don't have aristocracies, aristocracies, excuse me. Here we don't have rank, we don't have monarchies, we have rule of law. Now let's stop here. Notice that when he was talking in this interview, if you see the interview itself, he's stumbling again and again. His eyes are blinking, and the person there is basically understanding what he has to say. You have the option to pause. You have the option to read the annotation. So it is with this video. Okay? People really can't be taken seriously these days if they're not sabotaged. Okay? Because people get sabotaged when they do things that goes against the governing class's agenda, which includes an agenda of mass murder. Now, many people say things as controlled opposition, but they don't truly go against the agenda. So people take my videos seriously because they know that I'm persecuted for telling the truth, the absolute truth. Pretty straightforward. That's important there. One of the biggest losses, one of the things that is the biggest failure, is one of the biggest failures of the opposition view, is that they act like fucking propaganda politician bitches while I'm persecuted for righteousness' sake. And I've been saying this for years. And not only do they have no viable counter-argument, they've been acting like little kids instead of taking responsibility. And so here you have a former president. Obviously, he's nowhere near as respectable as I am. I'm infinitely more respectable than everyone else. But he's saying that they're not taking responsibility, and that's part of the problem. He says that everyone has a part to play here, and that they don't have, monarchies and a kind of feudal system, but they actually do. It's a behind-the-scenes feudal system. So in a sense, he's lying, and he knows better. He knows about the Masons. He knows about groups like that are like proxies for the Masons, who are proxies for the governing class, and what have you. Okay. So let's just keep reading here. They're feeling me because they know I'm right, and they know they're looking like some Simpson bitch. They're looking like a rocker, like those guys who bully Bart. They're looking like Mr. Burns and Smithers, Prince Humperdinck, Lex Luthor. They're looking like Masonic bitches. Okay, so where were we here? All right. We all have to take individual responsibility for our lives. We also have to, as Lincoln has said, do some things together because we can do it better together than we can do it apart. If that's our starting point, I think we'll be okay. That's not where we are right now, and I think right now what we are seeing is a politics that is reasserting a bad story of America, which is that even if there aren't technically ranks, we like the idea of caste, and we like the idea of hierarchy, and some people think this is our country, the real Americans, and these other folks are the phony and the fake Americans, or not even Americans. Now let's stop here. There's all kinds of worms, especially people who fit that description, who like to try to tell me what to do. Whether it's chastising the poor, I can chastise the poor as I see fit. Mexicans, blacks, whites, you name it. I'll chastise whoever, whenever. And you're not doing them any favors if you try to tell me not to. So everyone outside the divine order sinks lower. And that means their souls and their family souls and their friends and those who they lead, their children, are going to cook more in hell after their flesh dies. Now let's take a few minutes. Let's give me a few seconds. I want you all to think about how I'm in charge and how they act like bitches, and they don't have existential intelligence to understand why we're here and to put that first. Okay. Yes, you see how they went out like bitches? That's a recurring theme. I always put them in their fucking place every day. Most of the time it occurs, it's not, in the videos. It's as I move around the streets. It's as they communicate to me, and I say, look, I'm God's son, shut the fuck up. And when things get really heated, I say, meet me at the gate, they don't. It is not the American spirit that has been exerting power here. It is God's spirit, and I trample the American spirit as they fucking move against me like bitches. Okay? And every nation in rebellion is also getting trampled. Every other nation in rebellion is also getting trampled as well. What they're doing is a bad idea. When you try to tell Jesus what he's doing is a bad idea, you look like a bitch, you disgrace your family, and what the spirits you're in get trampled more. It's fucking retarded to take that path. I'm sure everyone listening to me right now agrees. Even atheists, even Satanists. Because when they look in the mirror, they don't see the top martial arts ever. They don't see someone who's a descendant of the martial art kings, the Nigerian kings, okay, who have everybody in the world in awe, have the white man scrambling like the Klan, like a bitch, to try to reduce their image because they know people naturally revere the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order, not the English order, the Jews, or the gays. I'm sure we can all agree on that. Okay, where were we here? Let that be a lesson to all of you, that you're better off shutting the fuck up rather than trying to tell me what to do. Okay. And that story also has a deep history in this country, right? That says, okay, the first Americans are not Americans, and slaves are not Americans, and women are sort of Americans as long as they're doing what their husbands say, and people of different sexual orientations, we don't even want to hear about them. That story has been a part of America as well, and you know, people sometimes ask me what is my favorite of the speeches I've given, and probably my favorite will be a portion of basically his speech he gave in regards to Selma. In Selma for the 50th anniversary, and the reason I love that speech is because to me, that contest on a certain bridge is an important battle, as Concord and Lexington and Appomattox, because you have on one side, you have John Lewis, a backpack and an apple and a toothbrush, and maids and college students have flown down, and rabbis and young priests, and they are carrying with them across that bridge this story, this better story that we're all equal, we all have a place, nobody's worse, nobody's better. Okay, let's stop right there. Is Obama living that story? If you take it literally to a T with technicalities, no. Because he's being given an interview because he's a former president that the vast majority of people wouldn't be given. And they wouldn't be treated with the same, you might say respect, but it's kind of a fake game-based respect, but you see what I'm saying. So this is one argument that I despise. They want everyone to kind of see themselves as unimportant so that when they try to get them to do despicable things, they say you're no better than the people who do despicable things, whether they're homosexuals, whether or not it's all homosexuals doing despicable things, we'll say for the rules on YouTube, whether it's prostitutes, whether it's corporate sluts, gold diggers, you know, child molesters. They want people in their cults doing whatever they tell them like a slave. These people were historically slave masters. The indentured servants were basically slaves, whether it was white slaves, black slaves, Native Americans, what have you. These people treated them like slaves. In the Masonic orders, they treated people like slaves. They used their seniority in various groups to treat people like slaves. They are the descendants of Greek and Roman slave masters who went around Europe subordinating and marginalizing the European people and assimilating them. And that's what the rape of Europa in Greek mythology is about, where Zeus rapes the deity of Europa, who stands for the spirit of the Europeans. It stands for the Europeans themselves. It stands for their ways and paths and cultures and their religions and so on and so forth. So obviously a moral order is a greater way to live than pretending everyone is equal, right? Rich people and covert types get over. He goes on to say, and we can all join together. And on the other side, you've got folks on horseback with billy clubs and guns and dogs, and they're carrying a different story, which is to ignore what we say in the Declaration of Independence. We have a caste system, and some people are better and more deserving than others, and have more power and more wealth. And so I think we are, you know, the question right now is being called, you know, that's how he said it in the annotations, right? So things are being called into question. And you asked about universities, law firms, businesses. Okay, it's one of his bigger concerns. When I see institutions cower before this bad story because they're worried that it will affect their bottom line in some fashion, and the question I've asked, you know, because there have been partners in law firms who have called me and asked me about this. There have been university presidents I had conversations with about this, businesses who've asked me how they think they should handle this. And what I've said is, well, do you believe that your starting point, you know, what do you care about? What's your mission? If you believe you are a university, what is your core mission? And if it is, as I think it is, your core mission should be to teach and to transmit knowledge and broaden horizons for young minds and transmit information. that allows them not just to get a job, but also to live meaningful lives and be good citizens if that's your mission. So having meaningful lives, right? Nobody's living a meaningful life these days but me, and there's something, and my parents are blameless, and there's something to be said about my brothers, but they're basically trying to find their lives in this world. So let's look at the wordplay to overkill why I'm right about that. Some of you might be like, well, that's arrogant. Okay, let's look at the wordplay here. You'll see that I'm right. So transmit information. Trains mate. Trains time, right? MIT becomes TIM. No need for the E. It still has the same wordplay there, so the wordplay works. So trains mate, aka transmit. Trains time. Trains might. Information in, for, mate. In or on, and the various applications, in school, on the planet, what have you. So information, and informagication, where the M can stand for magic, like Ronald McDonald, right? And that's like that occult. He's an occultist, basically, right? The idea of an occultist. So again, trains mate, inform alpha shun. Transmit information. Is that what they're doing? You betcha. Are females gold diggers instead of dating people based on the content of their character, like Martin Luther King says? Yes, absolutely. Are the social media sites structured that way? Yes, it's very few exceptions in terms of the females, if any. That's how the social media structures are structured. That's how the Masons, even the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, they subtly point to, thinking a certain way and dating a certain way. The churches, the mosques, the synagogues, okay? The government, the police, the military, they all reinforce those despicable falsehoods that trains, mate, inform, alpha, shun. Okay, goes on to say, then it doesn't really matter what the threats are coming up from the other. Push back against somebody who says you can't carry out that mission. So you got to push back against them, right? They think you can't carry out that mission. Doesn't matter what threats are coming. And if you're a law firm, then now obviously you're running a business. It's a partnership. You're billing, you want clients, but you're also supposed to be the officers of the court. You went into the law presumably not just because you couldn't think of anything else, or your dad or your mom thought it was a good idea. Presumably you went into the law because you believe in the law. So if you are getting pressure from government, okay, saying to ignore or fudge or compromise that commitment, you have to push back. Now, one thing I've noticed, and I've said this before in a few other venues, Heather, you and I both grew up after this World War II event, and America, is a colossus around the world, and we're exporting all these ideas, our economy's growing, and terrible things happen. During our lifetimes, Vietnam and assassinations and, killing fields in Rwanda, and so I don't want to in any way minimize those things. He brings up the infant mortality rate supposedly dropping, and Nixon tapes where he talks about bombing Cambodia, and he urges law firms to stand firm against government evil, and tariffs are brought up. So let's stop here for a second here. To remember that I'm quoting Obama at times here from the annotations in the videos, okay? And so he's saying that they're officers of the courts, right? And they're supposedly supposed to care about the law. Now, first of all, it used to be legal to own slaves in this country. As the story goes, it used to be a rule of thumb. Maybe they made that story up, but people repeated that a lot, and a lot of people believed it, and it could have easily been true if it wasn't. That you were allowed to beat your wife with a stick as long as it was no wider than your thumb, okay? And women didn't have the right to vote. So to believe in the law and corrupt politicians and whatever law they make is stupid. Even if they did enforce the law equally regardless of race, which they do not, it is still stupid to just believe in the law. You have to believe in what the law should be. You have to believe in universal pinpoint and moral precision. This is the difference between me and your typical police officers, military, right? They believe in just following orders from the same types of people who make legislation, who make the law what it is, okay? They believe in letting the Supreme Court, by their actions, right? Typically speaking, basically across the board, by their actions, what they've committed to, which reflects their deepest beliefs. Because actions speak louder than words. You see in Proverbs, even small children are known by their conduct. So is their conduct really upright, right? You know them by their works. Faith without works is dead, and so on and so forth, okay? Produce fruit in keeping with repentance, what John the Baptist said. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. Fools mock and making amends for sin. If a ruler listens to lies, all his officials become wicked, and so on. It's all throughout the Bible. So you should believe in universal pinpointed moral precision, not this kind of, not what Obama's like telling you two things at the same time. It's what they call liberal doublethink, but it's also conservative doublethink, right? It's really left wing, because a liberal is the idea of somebody's for individual rights, who has an open mind. And if you truly commit to that lifestyle, you're going to get to obey God through me in no time flat. You're going to look around and see all these liars and hypocrites, all these cowards, and you're going to be open to actually fulfilling the purpose of life. But people aren't. You know, there's not very many liberals on this planet. There's basically none. It's just me, and then I'm a divine person who goes beyond the limitations of the word liberal. Okay. So you see that there's two main paths that are presented in society, other than the ones that are obviously wrong, other than rockers, bikers, gangsters, thugs and drug addicts, things that are obviously wrong. Okay, there's the path of those people who are like rockers in suits, without the tattoos, with short hair, who are clean cut. That's basically what corporations are, right? They're rock and roll types, right? They just follow pleasure, right? They're neurotic, they're narcissistic, they're psychopathic. Their drug is greed. Their drug of choice is greed. And maybe they're an alcoholic too. Maybe they're not. Maybe they do cocaine. Maybe they don't. But they're like a rocker, right? Bezos and Trump and all the politicians, they're like rock and roll people, heavy metal people, without the tattoos, without the piercings, okay? Clean cut, in a suit, trying to present themselves as ideal. And that very much also applies to the military. They even say rock and roll quite often in popular culture before they go to battle. And certainly the SWAT team and police often do as well. Okay? The people in churches are like heavy metal people, except for clean cut, with a church uniform on instead. There's a certain satanic uniformity in the nations in the world, and Western culture is no exception. In fact, when you look at the history book in the last 500 years, for example, Western culture has been the main thing that's been plaguing the world in the last 500 years. It's a mix between Freddy Krueger himself, be it in a suit or with a wig or dressed in a military outfit, and Eeyore, a bunch of people with their heads down saying, "Oh, this sucks." And every once in a while someone says, "This sucks more than everyone else," and gets hung or something. Pretty straightforward. So, to put a lamp on its stand, one must highlight that these other cultures are wrong, and that only my path is right. I am the way, the truth, and the life. It's one of the most famous, you might call it a Christian saying of all time. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to heaven but by me, not on those other paths. If police and military want to go to heaven and still be police and military, they have to scramble together to expose gang stalking and to insist that my policies dominate the planet and the country, but they don't want to do that because they haven't committed to God. They've committed to the state, and all the nations are like dung before the Lord. You see in Malachi, okay, that God blights them. He curses their children. He curses their works because they refuse to obey God. And who do they obey God through? Say in the Bible, for example, which is a story, say through Malachi and Hosea and Zechariah and Zephaniah and Haggai and Obadiah and Isaiah and Jeremiah, through the prophets, through the one God set apart as the most righteous, who's delivering the message, right? And I'm the last one who will ever fit the description. After me, there will be no prophets and no valid kings. Okay. He goes on to say, all right, let's discuss that. So what's happening is that now we have a situation in which all of us are going to be tested in some way, and we are going to have to then decide what our commitments are, and it will be uncomfortable for a time, but that's how it's a commitment, right? So people are fearing being uncomfortable, but they're uncomfortable for a lot of reasons. For example, if, say, 1,000 people in California scramble to get together and to obey God through me, we could open tiny home villages and save lots of money in rent, and we could scramble to work together, and we could bear witness for each other in court when they harass us and they fume us and so on and so forth, and we could win big lawsuits and so on and so forth. But they're not doing that because they rather be uncomfortable following the crowd like an idiot. That's why the Bible says wisdom calls out and tells them to obey God. And folly calls out and tells them to not obey God. And you can see how it's playing out, where the masses of people are clearly going to hell, following the government, on their way to being hooked to a machine. Time and time again, they're warned by former presidents, they're warned by various people, the people working on AI themselves, the people who came up with it, and so on and so forth. They warn them again and again. They say, look, this AI is going to ruin everything. It's going to ruin you. It's going to be hacking your brain. They all but say it's going to be hacking your brain. It's obvious, right? The people who hack people's brains on record are spending lots of money on that, and they're spending trillions of dollars on artificial intelligence. They're going to put the two together. Only an idiot doubts that. And the word matrix is like the word dominatrix, and this country has a long history of sexual control, prostitution, porn, raping slaves, controlling their breeding, eugenics, controlling breeding, controlling the institutions to control who dates who, trying to impress upon people different ways to have sex. They literally tell women, and I'm sure guys, to go out there and to insist that people have sex certain ways so that their sexual culture has a certain uniformity. It is sick. They are even in your bedroom. They were in your bedroom manipulating how you have sex before they came up with the camera and the computer and the smartphone and so on and so forth. Okay. If you don't believe me, put in the comments. I'm going over time here. Okay. Because you do it when it's hard, not just when it's easy. Not just when it's trendy, not just when it's cool, you know. And sometimes I feel as if during my presidency, I think a lot of people felt comfortable in their righteousness because they didn't have to test it. And now you have to test it a little bit more. And again, this goes back to some people being better than others. Notice he spoke of the law firms that went along with Trump's policies as cowering before the president. If you're speaking down about a person, you're saying that people who don't do what you disapprove of are better than people who do. Okay, so you can interpret those words when he said that no one thinks they're better than anyone else. Hey, if you're doing the wrong thing, you're doing bad. You're a bad guy. And bad and worse are connected, and good and better are connected, and great and greatest and better than are connected. And it's the content of the character, not how much money someone makes, that determines who's better than who. And if your righteousness is tested and you fail, like everyone on this planet is doing except for me and my parents are blameless, then you aren't equal to or better than someone like me, and the only one like me, mind you, whose righteousness hasn't failed when tested. The storm of the Lord came forth. I had the armor of God. Everyone else had the armor of Lucifer, and some were so in denial that they thought they had the armor of God on. Okay. So she says, President Obama has been a real pleasure, and I would like to end, if we can, on a note of hope. Yes, and that is, I don't know if you know that the president, if you all don't know that the president, Mr. Obama and Mrs. Obama, have a foundation which fosters the next generation of leaders. And I would leave it if you could tell us, I would love it if you could tell us what advice you are giving those young scholars to enable them to be optimistic about their future and about the future and maybe our future. So I was going to make this video in like 3 parts. No, I'm going to still do it in 3 parts here. So I'm just going to end this page, and it's not going to finish the answer. So see the rest of the answer in part 3. Yes, I'm still optimistic. I'm still the hope guy. I am, but the thing is, look, part of the reason I'm hopeful, as Heather mentioned, our foundation, the premise of it is that leaders do not just pop up, that there is extraordinary talent in every community, in rural neighborhoods, communities, inner city neighborhoods. There are remarkable leaders in fancy Ivy League schools, but there are also amazing leaders who don't go to college and are organized. And let's stop here. Is he right about this? Yes and no. He's right that leaders don't just pop up, which goes back to some people are better than others. If you're a leader and you're a righteous leader, you're greater than somebody who's a wicked follower. Pretty straightforward. But is he right to have hope in the future? No. Because tech, cheating, and generational ill-gotten gains makes it so that only crazy people reproduce. So if their children are the future and you shouldn't reproduce no matter what, there is no hope for the future, period. And these people that he's referring to as leaders, they're just controlled opposition people like Masonic politicians. They're people who are in some kind of social club, secret society, cult, fraternity, you name it, some kind of group, CIA assets, what have you, assets of foreign governments, and they just ride the wave and are trained by some punks who aren't leaders themselves. Okay, no offense to anyone, but this has to be said. Thank you.